Adirondack forest rangers have been under immense stress for the last several years. They're short-staffed. They're often overworked responding to hikers in trouble in the mountains. 4 of them have died in the last 4 years. One of them was on an extended work trip in the backcountry last month, but his death went unnoticed for days. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street, Glens Falls.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Thursday, July 24th. First up, last month the Army announced plans to shut down the North Country's only Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC program. But Senator Chuck Schumer announced yesterday that's now on hold. News intern Noah Dinellendosa reports.
The ROTC program is based at Clarkson University in Potsdam. It allows college students across the region to receive basic military training while completing their education. The Army announced last month that Clarkson is one of 10 colleges across the country that will lose their ROTC program amid civilian job cuts. The news sparked opposition from Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York. He sent a letter to the Secretary of the Army opposing the shutdown. Schumer announced Wednesday the Army is now pausing its plans to shutter the program as it reviews concerns raised by the North Country community. Clarkson's ROTC enrollment officer, Scott Toth, told NCPR in an email that he expects further guidance from the Army later this week. He said no further details were provided, and he doesn't know what this means for the program. In a statement, Schumer said he'll continue fighting to protect the Clarkson program. He said, quote, "We need assurances that the only Army ROTC host unit in the North Country is here to stay." For North Country Public Radio, this is Noah Dinellendosa in Potsdam.
Public health officials are advising people to stay away from algae blooms in Black Lake in St. Lawrence County. The county's public health department has issued a blue-green algae advisory for the lake. Blooms can turn the water green and create thick scum on the surface. Officials recommend people avoid swimming or fishing in the affected areas. Algae blooms can cause skin or eye irritation, diarrhea, and vomiting if ingested. Any person or animal who's come into contact with the algae should rinse off immediately with clean water. A longtime assistant forest ranger died in the Adirondacks last month. Brendan Jackson was 42 years old. He was known for his dedication to the job, his deep knowledge of the park, and his love for the outdoors. Jackson's death went unnoticed by the state for more than a week. Emily Russell reports on his legacy in the Adirondacks and how his death has sparked calls for reforms at the DEC.
Danny Carr went camping a lot with her friend Brendan Jackson. One memorable moment was in the Farrow Lake Wilderness area. Carr had just hiked in to meet Jackson.
And within 5 minutes, a bullet comes shooting through our campsite. Choom! And he's like, well, gotta go deal with that.
Jackson was an assistant forest ranger for the DEC. He'd camp a lot for work, patrolling the trails, educating hikers and campers. Carr says he encountered all kinds of people.
It was a guy peacefully camping by himself, and he was just plunking away at a can right by the shoreline, but he wasn't aware that sometimes the bullets will hit the water just right and skip and keep going.
So Jackson had to approach the man, who he knew was armed, and say, hey, what you're doing is unsafe, and you need to stop. Jackson was a decent-sized guy. He had a big beard, wire-rimmed glasses, and often wore a baseball hat. Carr says he approached people with respect but sternness. He joined the DEC back in 2008. He started as an AFR in the West Canada Lake Wilderness area, then to Farrow Lake, and finally to the High Peaks, where many more people come to hike and camp. Carr says her friend was the perfect person for the job.
You know, he could provide that education and also kind of confront them and being like, hey, you do not seem prepared, and the best decision that you could make right now for you and your group is to turn around and find something else to do.
In early June, Jackson was camping for work at Duck Hole. It was his favorite spot in the Adirondacks, a 7-mile hike deep in the western High Peaks. On June 14th, about a week into his work trip, Carr and another close friend realized they hadn't heard from Jackson. So she reached out to DEC dispatch and then to a forest ranger who confirmed what she had feared.
His last contact was Saturday, June 7th, and he hasn't been heard of since.
Early the next morning, on June 15th, a group of rangers hiked into Duck Hole. They found Jackson's body in his tent inside his sleeping bag. He had likely been dead for about a week in the summer heat. The initial autopsy was inconclusive, though there were no clear signs of foul play, and Carr says there was no indication that Jackson had suicidal thoughts. Forest Ranger Jamison Martin met Jackson at Paul Smith College 20 years ago. Speaking as a union representative, Martin says his death was a huge blow. He's the fourth person to die in the ranger community in the last 4 years. But Martin has found some solace in the details of his death.
Well, the only thing I know about life is that it will end. So the fact that he was in his happy place doing what he loved to do, and that it seemed like it happened overnight and probably relatively, in the grand scheme of things, probably relatively quick and painless. Like, it helps ease that burden.
But other details of Jackson's death brought a different kind of pain. Normally, rangers and AFRs working in the woods will radio into DEC dispatch each morning and radio out in the evening. That helps keep track of where everyone is. Jackson had been doing that until he signed out the evening of June 7th. The DEC declined an interview request for this story and wouldn't confirm his work schedule that following week, but multiple sources say he was supposed to work multiple days that week. Jackson failed to radio in and out of work for days, and the DEC didn't seem to notice. Danny Carr believes that's a sign of broader negligence at the state agency.
I do want to make clear that this is not one person's fault. This is like a systematic failure.
A month after Jackson's death, a group of his friends started an online petition. Among other things, it calls for the state to better keep track of rangers and other DEC staff in the field. About 6,000 people have signed the petition so far. Ranger Martin says the state used to have a better tracking software for its employees, but then it switched to another one years ago. Martin says it's less effective at keeping track of staff in the backcountry.
We don't all necessarily want to have GPS trackers around our necks or in our trucks or anything like that, but to be able to reach out when we need to reach out, or to be able to be reached when we need to be reached, would be huge.
In a statement, the DEC said it's evaluating, quote, all processes and procedures to ensure appropriate oversight of assistant forest rangers. DEC Commissioner Amanda Lefton offered her sympathies to the family and described Jackson as a long-time and valued DEC employee. Ranger Martin said he prevented so many rescues and saved a lot of people's lives. Jackson also knew the park like the back of his hand.
He was an amazing asset to us. He was literally like a Adirondack encyclopedia. Like, you could ask him any question about like the most obscure place in the Adirondacks, and he would be like, "Oh yeah, da 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 da."
That knowledge was helpful both on the job, but also to the wider Adirondack community. Years ago, Jackson started submitting corrections to Adirondack mapmakers. Those corrections landed him a role helping guidebook author Tony Goodwin. The two worked together for years on the 80K High Peaks map.
The map would not be nearly as complete and useful for hikers if he hadn't been willing to offer his input. By the time, the most recent printing, the names really should have been reversed. Should have been Brendan Jackson and Tony Goodwin.
Jackson's death leaves a huge hole in the Adirondacks. He also leaves behind a group of friends who are more like family, people like Danny Carr. She says the one thing that's helped her cope is seeing all the memories people have been sharing online.
To hear everybody's posts about like how many lives that he touched and how appreciative of him everyone was, and just how like consistently beautiful of a human he was. That's really nice. But I just miss him too much.
Every fall for the last 20 years, Carr and Jackson and others would go on a camping trip. They called it their Duck Hole trip, since it started as an annual tradition there. After Jackson's death, Carr and other close friends hiked into Duck Hole. They spread some of his ashes and celebrated their friend who gave so much to this place. Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario, and Tim Elifritz of Johnsburg. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.